All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Helen Avery, Mark Treick from Cellar Wine Tours. We're here at Nicholson Library at Linfield College. It's December 5th, 2019. Thank you both for joining us today. We do appreciate this. Let's start with kind of the basic question, which is why wine tours, I guess, in your case? What got you into wine tours?
Well, why wine?
Well, it starts with, well, I guess for me, I started off, our stories come together at a juncture in time, but I started off in the restaurant industry, working as a waitress right out of college. I have a degree in communications from the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I'm from Colorado, and moved here to the Portland area in 1999. No, 97. 97.
Yeah. Started dating in that.
I know, it's dating me. And we started dating in 99. And I was the general manager at the TGI Fridays in the Washington Square Mall, which is no longer there. Yeah, that franchise went away. But he was a beer salesman at Widmer Brothers Brewing Company. So he was our on-premise beer salesman while I was the general manager at the restaurant. And that's how we ultimately met.
Right.
So hospitality and food and beverage has always been my background. And
yeah, my background was always, it wasn't beer sales right away, but that's how we met.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't beer sales. And when I first moved down here, I guess it's, for me, why wine was what really intrigued me, and I use it a lot. But I use it a lot in our tours, asking people what their experience is. What was their first experience that made them realize that wine was a viable option for them? And so for me, it started in college, because I have a degree in geography, and I'm always into geography and out there, and I've always liked the geography of wine. Not so much old world, but what was in my backyard when I went to Central Washington University, and you had the Yakima Valley just down the street, 30 minutes away. And I did a paper in college in my social geography class, and I decided to do it on the wine that was grown in our area. And so for research, I had to go down and buy wine and research wine. And so there was no somms in our world at that time. There was no restaurants worthy of any wine. So I had to go to the Safeway store or the Albertson store or something like that and get as many wines as possible from these regions. Generally it was, I had to go with the cheaper wines, and that would have been a lot of Rieslings and
like Chateau Ste. Michelle or something like that.
Yeah, and then go to the bottom shelf and you find a Washington wine of Cabernet or Merlot or something like that.
Yeah.
And back then, buying those wines for Riesling was probably like $6.50, and I would be really splurging to get a cab for $7, And so anyway, so I did drink a lot of that, but it wasn't until a friend of mine in college, really, that I met again 20 years later back in Cardiff in Wales, that he taught me how to drink in college. And he was
very important
at the time, and he showed me the nuance of drinking beer as well as whiskey. And wine was an introduction to him, but that we had a world revolved around drinking, and not in a bad way, but that was really my introduction to drinking. Then I moved down to Portland in '97, and eventually I had this experience with my sister. I was at their house for dinner, and my brother-in-law and sister are in the wine industry out here with Woodson Ridge. Share the same hill with Beaufrere and Patty Green Cellars.
Well, and before we go there, maybe we should go back to where because this is where we kind of come together, but
right.
But for me, the part about wine is I started I didn't grow up in a household that wine was prevalent. My dad was a Milwaukee's Best or a Schlitz beer drinker, and my mom didn't drink at all. Yeah, my mom didn't drink at all, and we would maybe have I wouldn't even be able to tell you but the brand, but maybe a cheap Chardonnay on a dinner table with Thanksgiving dinner. And my dad would let me have a little taste of it as, we were little kids. So that was like really my only exposure to it until I got into college. And at that point, I didn't go as far as Boone's Farm, but as Sutter Home and Behringer White Zinfandel were like, and that was back in the early 90s, late 80s when I was in college, and early 90s. And it was White Zinfandel from Sutter Home and Behringer White Zin that I really kind of I turned to. And everybody's got to start with wine somewhere. And I kind of got into like the Kendall Jackson Chardonnays that were a little bit better, and that's kind of what I dealt with a lot. The Cabernet and the Chardonnay from Kendall Jackson in the casual restaurant industry is what we would always, maybe an Ernest and Julio Gallo or something like that would be that's what they carry for glass pours on those corporate restaurants in most cases. Yeah, so my exposure was limited to that kind of stuff at the beginning, and then I did make a trip to Napa with a boyfriend right out of college. He was doing a year at Stanford, and I took a trip, and I was just 21 at that point, and did the whole Napa Valley and was exposed to Cabernets for the most part, those big Bordeaux blends. And I was tasting them. I didn't get the experience there to understand what the structure of all this stuff going on in my mouth was all about. And I'm like, it's drying my mouth out. I couldn't, after, I'm like, let's just go see Behringer and White and Sutter Home. I want to go see those estates. So it's what I recognized and I knew I liked. So that's where we ended up seeing all of those, but I saw a lot of Cabernets along the way. And I finally, looking back, now understand from a much different perspective now. But I realize that those were just very young wines, and nobody taught me about the fruit flavors and the tannic influence coming from the barrels and all of the different flavor profiles that were happening, and I didn't understand it in my palate until much later. So then
you started being in the wine or the restaurant business, and you started your chef acquainted with food, and your palate developed. Which
brings us to when we met and started dating in late 90s, 99 or so, and we made it up to Whistling Ridge to our family's farm, in-law family, and his sister's house for dinner, and I taste this yummy, bright cherry fruited flavor and elegant profile going on within my palate, and I'm like, it was a Pinot Noir from their vineyard, and it was just the family. It wasn't even a labeled bottle, but every year that they make a batch that's just family, that's the Shiners, and that's what we drink for the family stuff. And I fell in love with it. Yeah. I was taken by it. I'm like, this is a red wine I can drink. I love this. And that was the start for me to like really start to dive into Pinot Noir and understand it.
I was telling the story about the dinner I had with my sister and brother-in-law, and he went down, it wasn't a Pinot, but he went downstairs into what he called their cellar, but it was really where the boxes are and the dust collects and the spiders are, and he went down there and he literally got the bottle out of the box and blew off the dust, and it's like, where? Oh, and he looked at it, and it was a Washington cab, and it was 15 years old at that time, and so he brought it upstairs. I don't remember what we were having for dinner, but I do remember that cab, and it was Yakima Valley winery, and it doesn't exist anymore. Didn't exist back then in the late 90s. And so we were drinking something that absolutely was gone, in reality, except for what was in that bottle. And so we got the glasses, and he opened it up, and it was ginger, and pull it out, and gingerly pulled it out, and poured it out, and that was my first experience of having a chestnut hue colored red wine. And we both looked at each other. I think it was my brother-in-law's first experience too. And I said, "Is this good to drink?" And it was literally, I'll use this cup as an example. He poured it out, and I didn't know anything about nose or anything like that, but I just did the courtesy sip and just touched it to my lips, and then I literally grabbed the bottle and I said, "You can't have this. This is mine." And I didn't even know what it was, really, except for the fact in my world of drinking was that this changed the way I looked at wine from that point forward. And it made me realize that maybe the geography guy inside of me, I was more interested in where it came from and how could anything be this good. And it wasn't a mixed drink. It wasn't like a margarita or something like that. And it wasn't beer, which I adore beer. But at that time, that changed the way I looked at it. And then probably the next week, I went out and tried to find a job in the wine business. And I was unemployed at that time. So that's what I did, but I didn't know anything about it. Eventually wound up being a beer salesman and at Woodward Brothers Brewing Company, and then got to the distribution side of things and started working at Columbia Distributing in Portland. And that's where I was exposed. I was an on-premise beer salesman, but I was exposed to a lot of wine, great wine.
Yeah.
And industry friends, Bill Hansen, worked at Columbia at that time. He's at Stoller Vineyards now, and he was instrumental in me really understanding more about wine, because we'd all get together now, and wine to me became family. And so Bill would come to our family's house, and then Mike Etzel would come to our house, and
Brian O'Donnell from Belpont. They're good friends, Brian and Jill.
Adia Wines.
Dean and Ann.
We met all these people, and they were just friends. We didn't
Kristen and
realize
Jim,
they were celebrities.
and then the Albans, all those.
So why wine would be the culmination of family and friends that came together, and we were such a part of it, and we didn't even realize it. And then in 2012, we started a company because it was just like we had a car that was paid for and it held 6 people. And wow.
Yeah, and to back up a little bit, we met, and we ended up moving back to Colorado from 2002 to 2009. I was given a job opportunity back in Colorado, and it was kind of the end of my dad's lifetime. And Mark ended up working for Budweiser in Colorado. And the funny thing is, we would always come back every year. So our family, at the family vineyard at Chuck and Diane's house, they would bring all the grapes down from the vineyard up at Dick and Patricia's, and Labor Day weekend, we always had to come back, and it was the family bottling for all those Shiner bottles that we would be drinking, and we would not want to miss those years if at all possible. We were always trying to get here.
Favorite thing to do.
Because when we were in Colorado, we couldn't find wines of that quality and that level. And I think for me, at the beginning of all of this, I didn't even realize what we were sitting within. I mean, I was still living in Portland, and I've come to realize that a lot of people in Portland don't even know what's in their backyard out here. And I was one of those people for a really long time, not realizing that this country was out here full of this beautiful nature and places, and the vines were just, they're starting off. To the, when you look at the history of our valley and how long it's really been here. late 90s was still in its infancy. We're still in our infancy, if you ask me, but there's a lot more now than there was back in 2000. And we jumped from going to Colorado, doing that Labor Day weekend bottling, and then trying to figure out how do we get this wine back home on a plane so we can have some wine.
God, I think
this is the funniest story.
We changed the policy on shipping wine
on Southwest Airlines.
Because I just put like newspaper between the bottles.
We had
boxes,
just the regular boxes with the inserts for regular case packaging.
They were just like, literally, they didn't know, and we had 7 cases of wine. And so we just checked it, and then we watched it go from this checked area over to this conveyor belt.
And they were going to x-ray it. God.
And I remember one of the boxes falling off of the
and we
belt,
hear crash.
Oh, God.
And you saw liquid coming out.
Oh, no. And they're like,
And I'm like, we better go to the
we were already going through security, and we get this overhead call at Portland International going, Helen Avery and Mark Treick, please return to the ticketing counter.
We didn't leave Portland for another 8 hours.
We were not going to leave the wine, so
I told Helen.
We missed our flights. We took a cab, and we went in and tried to find like a Staples or a store that would have bubble wrap at least. And the girl at the ticketing counter was so nice. She was working with us, because nowadays you walk up to those ticket counters, if you don't have the right packaging, you're not getting that wine on. But they didn't have those regulations back then for taking it on the flights. Well, mind you, this was probably before 9/11 happened.
Yeah, it was.
It was. Yeah. So, yeah, there's a big reason why that happened the way it did. And
no, it wasn't. It was after.
Yeah.
It was after 9/11.
Anyways, it was a crazy afternoon to go find packaging to get all of the bottles wrapped up as best we could, get them back in a box, tape the box back up, and get on another flight that we got pushed off to, which I'm surprised it even happened. But we got back home with...
So I don't think you guys understand what we did. We individually bubble wrapped every single bottle.
And stuffed them back in there and then like wrapped them up.
Everything else around it and then taped it up.
Yeah.
So we probably bought $100 worth of bubble wrap.
I don't know.
To do 7 cases. And then the person the manager behind the counter just like, okay.
She gave a stamp of approval, and we got it on. We're like, yay.
And I was exhausted. Helen was really revved up about this, and this whole journey to get to I was just like, I'm ready to give up. It's like, do we really want this wine that bad? And Helen's like, it's thousands of dollars worth of wine. We are going to bring it home. I'm like, okay.
I was on a mission.
It was just like stacked against our wall. And it was the beginning of wine coming to Colorado.
Yeah.
Plenty of wine against our wall after a couple of years.
But you couldn't go into the liquor stores in Denver or anywhere really for that matter. If I did, I could find Duck Pond. I could find Erath, and I could find Firesteed, were the 3. And those are our mass producers that are here. And those are the ones that are the $15 price points too.
Right.
Which are, they're great. That's what gets people here for us, that, it's your entry in. But once I had that level of boutique wine from a specific AVA and that specific terroir, and I started to understand it, I was like not going to go back to the $15 bottles of those producers anymore. I was sold on the better places and the better places
and one
in
of my
our area.
thoughts when we were living in Colorado, and we lived in great places, being down in the Denver area between Boulder and Denver, but then we moved to Breckenridge, and being up there, I thought, God, wouldn't it be great to have just a wine store dedicated to Oregon Pinot? And that was just a thought I had. Never pursued it, but I still think that's a concept that anybody from Colorado watching this, use it. Fill it up in Breckenridge.
Yeah.
Buy, because a lot of people go to Aspen every year for big events and big Pinot and other wines, but there's a huge market up there.
Yeah.
For really specific wines.
Yeah.
And And it was specific to me because we tried really hard when we were in Colorado to buy only Washington or Oregon if we could, not because saturated market was California there.
So yeah, after getting married in Colorado and going through those Labor Day weekends of traveling back and forth, we finally decided to start a family, and it was right about the same time. It coincided with my father's passing, and we had a big decision. Do we stay in Colorado or do we want to move back here? Well, when he passed away, it made the decision a little bit more easy for us because there really wasn't anything. I mean, our friends were a hard thing to leave, but we wanted family to have close to us for raising our family. And since I was pregnant when my dad passed, we made the decision to move back here, and not just to Portland, but back to this area, to Newburgh. And
Whistling Ridge became really important to us at that point.
His sister and Chuck and Dick and Patricia up at the Vineyard were a big reason why we decided to make that transition back here in 2009 and come start our family, which is what we did. And
well, when her dad passed away, then that was 6 months into her pregnancy.
Yeah.
And he was living in Colorado Springs. We didn't have any connection to Mike Etzel at that time. But because he's from
we'd met him plenty of times at family dinners,
Springs.
but yeah.
But when I don't know if anybody's ever been to Colorado Springs, but I loved her dad. But when he wasn't there, it's like, I don't want to live in Colorado Springs. And I think both of us felt that way. She kind of grew up there.
Right.
And so we decided, where do we want to go? And we had an opportunity to do it. So we decided to move out here to Oregon to be close to my sister.
Yeah.
And knowing where my mom was and relative to other sisters, if we stayed in Colorado, my son would never see family.
Right.
So we decided to come out here, and it just brought us out to this area. And that was really the beginning of now, what do we want to do out here? Because we had time.
Well, and since we had started a family, I was done being a manager in a restaurant. I was not willing to work those crazy odd hours and many hours while I was raising a child. Yeah. So, so we got here in, it was 2009, right after our son was born, literally 10 days. We up and moved. I know, it was crazy how it all fell into place. So we got here right at the 1st of June. He was born May 20th, and we got here June 3rd. I know.
Incredible, isn't it?
I know. And it went well without a hitch.
No, it really did.
It did, but we got here, and I luckily, with my dad's passing, I was able to take a little bit of time off and spend those first few months with my son at home and be that mom for a little bit.
Yeah, we got we had an inheritance from his passing from his estate.
Yeah.
And so that allowed us to do a lot of things
that we wouldn't have been able to do at the beginning of all of this. So we got here and got established, and then we did have to finally get going again with jobs, and Mark ended up working as a supervisor at the Safeway in Newburgh. He didn't really want to get back into that beer salesman business. He'd done his time. Yeah. But I was fine. I just figured I would maybe look for a bartending type job. So the Allison Inn and Spa had just opened up, and
I remember that when she went in.
Yeah.
She was like, get my resume ready. So I got it all ready, and then we went to the job fair for her to the Allison. They were literally just open. They barely had managers.
Well, they opened in September of 2009, and I started working there in March of 2010. So we waited.
Pierre's last name.
Zreek?
Yeah,
Zreek? I'm sorry.
Anyway,
sorry, Pierre, if you watch this. If I say it wrong.
I got Pierre. When we went to a job fair there, and here comes this woman with immense amount of restaurant experience, and on the management side, and we're seeing people in there, and then they're just kind of mingling around, and people would leave and come, and then then she went in there, sat down, gave the guy the resume, and immediately he got out of the chair. I was in the concourse, and he immediately got out of the chair and went directly to the pier and basically was like holding this resume up. And I just looked at Helen. It had two worlds going on here. Helen and these guys talking
And
about
I'm
Helen.
just sitting in there waiting, going.
Just sitting there like this for like 10 minutes, like nothing happening here. And then they had this conversation. This guy went right back in there, and basically my side. You can tell the rest of the story, but my side of the story was like.
Well, they did end up actually talking to me about wanting. They had a management position open, and I'm just like, I gave them a number for one, and I don't think they were ready to pay that number for just a regular manager. But I came from being a general manager. But at the same time, my experience wasn't high-end, fine dining, James Beard places. It was more corporate. And at the same time, I'm like, I really don't want to be a manager. So I gave them a really high number because I didn't want to do it. It had to be worth my while, and it really wasn't going to be. So I was really honestly looking for the bartending position because I wanted to just have that flexibility with a child, have hours that were gonna be 40 or less a week, not 60 because you're on a salary and they make you do that. So I was happy with, and he's like, well, they offered me the daytime bartending position there, and that was the start of me really understanding this valley's wines, really meeting a lot of winemakers. That the list there has 700 bottles on it.
And
I mean, it's huge. And every day during the daytime, they were all coming in and having lunch. They would bring in their bottles of wine. They wanted to get their bottles of wines on the list. So they're talking to this, all of the managers or sommeliers there of some level or another. And then you have the chefs pairing and doing the foods to pair with the wines, and we got to taste those foods and those wines together on a daily basis. So I really started to understand and develop my palate from a food and beverage standpoint that I had never done before. And that was an integral part, and I didn't even know I was doing it. It's just by happenstance that it's turned into that development for myself, and I didn't even know that's where it was leading. So it did just automatically through the course of time.
She had a palate developed with her culinary background. And then it was a natural progression for her, as it turns out, to go right into wine. Yeah. And the big thing was that it was predominantly Pinot because that's what was here, and my experience was never Pinot, right, except for family stuff. But that was really that transition to now our world was becoming more and more Pinot, and then she was meeting people left and right, like Patricia Green. And Jim Mike Essa would come in there a lot.
Doug Tennell would come in all the time. Don Haig would come in and have lunch all the time from Vidon, and I really got to know all those, a lot of those people, and then the distributors. Right. Marcus Goodfellow. I mean, we already knew Marcus because he's our family's winemaker, but Marcus would come in, Garen would come in. I mean, just
the people at Galaxy would show up to there, and I was at Safeway at this time, and they knew they would call me over to talk to people about wine.
He practically became the wine steward. Yeah.
But anyway, that was a big part of where we went from there, because but we had a big transition that really got us into what we're doing now at that point. Yeah. Because we were always we always wanted to do something on our own and not have our own, have jobs. And now we have.
You could say we were going through a midlife crisis.
The way I describe it.
And
the way I describe it to me, and you have a lot to say on this, but the way I saw it was, we had dreams, but our dreams were running way faster than we could catch them.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I just gave up chasing it. And it was kind of a low point. And then we were burning candles at both ends. I would take the kids. I had to work at 4 o'clock. She was getting off around 3, and so I would take the kids in the car, drop them off. She'd go home. I'd go to work, and then I'd get home at 1.
And in the
2.
course of all of this, we had a daughter
Yeah, 2
in
kids.
2011 here. Her name was Chelsea, and this is where the transition happens, where we lost her.
Yeah. She, so we lost Chelsea, and it wasn't a planned thing, that's for sure. But it was a home accident.
Yeah, she
And
fell in our, we'll
backyard
just say it,
pool.
I mean, it's our story, she fell in our backyard pool and drowned. And I was working at the Allison, just started my shift that morning, and Mark was home with them when it all happened.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that phone call that day
Yeah.
when the hostess came around the corner and said, "Helen, you have to go home." And I'm like,
She knew.
"What do you mean?"
Yeah.
And they just said, the paramedics are working on Chelsea, and that's all they needed to say. I knew exactly what had happened. It didn't have to know that it was the pool. I knew it was the pool. It just, And I was running out of that building, and I ran into Pierre. I know he'll never forget that day either. And neither will any of the people that worked at that family. Yeah, they were. I ran out that back door, and he was like, "Let me put you in my car and I'll drive you." And I go, "You won't drive fast enough." And I jumped in the car and I got home, and the paramedics were working on her in the yard, and they flight for life her to Portland. And they had her on life support for about 24 hours before we had to finally just call it, because there was no chance for her to survive. It was a brutal 24 hours for us.
But I'll have to say,
But it was also, it was probably one of, it was one of the biggest days for a wake up that anybody can ever go through. I tell our guests, sometimes on our tours, the story comes out because you have very intimate days with your guests throughout the day. And then other times the story does not come out, and that's okay. There's a right place and a right moment for it. And when I have to talk about it, or I do talk about it, it's the most painful experience any parent could ever go through, losing a child. Yet, I always tell people, you have the choice to stay in pain or surrender to it and be okay and move forward. And she gave us a gift to wake up and do life in a manner that gives us purpose and fulfills us with the passionate things that we do in our life. And I don't know if I would have been there had this not happened to us. So even though it's painful not having her here in our life, she's given us this gift to move forward and start this business and be so passionate about it, which I think is a large part of our success and where we're at right now with what we do on a daily basis.
yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy to come to that conclusion.
No, it took a long time.
It was, I mean, we were at the low point in our life then, and then you realize, we can go a little bit lower. No one plans for that. And we realized where we were really wasn't that low.
Yeah.
And so that perspective of looking up was really, it was part of us coming closer together.
Yeah.
And then really realizing who we were and what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go.
Yeah.
And we took the opportunity. I learned how to build websites. She learned a lot about online marketing, and kind of what we did was one day, my story is we had this car that had 6 people.
Well, we got to a
6
place
people,
after a
and
few
I-
months of, we had to do a lot of healing, and the community supported us like you wouldn't believe. I mean, I have nothing but loving memories of how Newburgh and the Allison Inn and Spa and Safeway and all the people that we knew
family.
that supported us, the Newburgh Christian Church, doing what they did to get us through that horrible time and lifting us up. I mean, the chefs at the Allison Inn Spa, they went out and bought a cooler, and every morning they just said, bring it back to when you need food. They're like, they did at first, and they're like, just bring it back if you need, or they had somebody pick it up, and they refilled it for us for like 2 or 3 weeks to make sure we were fed and all of our family was fed and taken care of. I know, we did. We finally we're like, we're okay now. We can get through this.
We weren't okay. I mean,
well,
it was 2 weeks. You stopped feeding us.
But I mean, it's just, the Austins did so much.
Yeah.
You went into a place to work like that, and they, as owners of a business like that, they knew who each one of us was, and they took care of all of us. And
I have respect for the Austin family.
Yeah.
And
to this
Joanne
day,
and Ken, they looked at everybody. This is what family does, and they treat a lot of their employees as this is what we do, and the integrity that was involved was really, you learn from their example, and the employees that helped us, the management at the restaurant and the hotel, they embodied it, and they were kind of a beacon, a bright light for when we were in our darkest corner.
I always say, like, they were the wings that lifted us up and kept us flying.
And I'm an artist too, and a pencil artist, and one of my portraits I drew was after Joanne passed away. They had a memorial service, and it was top of my list to actually do this portrait of her and present it to her husband. And so I asked Lonnie if that would be an appropriate thing to do, and she said yes, and then she had it framed, and then I was able to present it to Ken before he passed away, obviously, and I couldn't even get through it because his family did so much for us, and presenting this drawing of his wife, and all I can just remember is Ken just saying that, oh, you guys have been through so much more.
Yeah, just humble humans.
Yeah.
And
incredible family.
Yeah. And that's what we came to realize, is that the community here, and we get asked this in our cars a lot, they're like, do people compete and is it bad? And I'm like, no. My memories and my thoughts of everybody that's here that we've come in contact with have just been a pillar of strength and support for one another.
Yeah.
And when you hear of the passing of a winemaker or something like that, everybody, everybody steps up and is there for one another. And we realize that this is where we need to be. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, it was 9 months or so after Chelsea passed away that we were at this place that we had to think about going back to work again. I mean, we took a good 9 months off. We literally did not work. We healed. And we were lucky to be able to do that without a lot of financial strife. We were able to make it through, and that's when we looked at where are we at, what do we want to do. That midlife crisis, we were just like, we've got to do life differently, and we really I guess I've always had an entrepreneurial bug in my system. It wasn't the first business that I've actually owned. When we were in Breckenridge, I owned a coffee cart. And that was
small, but
it was a good business, yeah.
cash.
You know, and I've always felt, I'm like, if I can run multi-million-dollar corporate restaurants, why can't I do something that just supports us to give us the flexibility to raise our child the way we want to, the lifestyle that we want, to be able to choose and pick our own hours and work when we want to. And that was my ultimate goal. And we looked at, what does this area offer? And it's kind of a no-brainer when you look at it. There's wine. There's a lot of it. And so we started talking to, we looked at a couple of different wine tour companies, and for us, we came together. We kind of had mentioned it in passing, I guess, a couple times, going, we should just start a wine tour company.
Can I tell my story?
Yeah.
Okay.
His is different than mine, but.
Yeah, but I tell it all the time in my tours, and it makes an impact with them. I literally remember it this way. I was in our bedroom, and Helen, I think, was in the kitchen, and I walked down the hallway. She came into the great room, we met there, and I go, I have something to tell you. And she goes, I have something to tell you. And she said, you go first. And I said, let's start a wine touring company. And she goes, that's what I was going to do. And that was, and when I tell that story, people are just like, you're kidding.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I'm not. In 3 days, we made a list of go on Google and trying to figure out what URL,
Well, we needed a domain name we could get.
And so we
looked at
20 of them. Cellar Door Wine Tours was available, so we bought it.
We looked at every other wine companies that we could find, how they were doing things, what their price points were, were they offering, how were they offering things throughout the day. And then I also looked at, I know this is what I would want.
Winery involved, we can get everything.
Yeah, I'm like, this is what I know I would want out of a day.
Yeah.
For this area, and be able to put that personal touch on it, because I was kind of at that time with some of the internet marketing things that I had been learning. It was about personal branding and your story. Your story is so freaking huge. And
so I love the archive, because it's amazing, the story of each individual. It makes their journey so incredible.
Right, and when you go into wineries where the story's been lost, it's a sad thing, because there are places that we can go nowadays that story isn't being told.
Or the story's changing, it's evolving because the story didn't work before.
Right.
But there's no foundation for the story.
But yeah, so yeah, we took off and really put all of those things, and I think the one key thing we wrote down that really has been a point from the beginning of this touring business to now is, we wrote one simple sentence that said, we are here to, what did we say? We guiding you with I'm not saying it right. Couples and small groups that know each other.
Yeah. We only do
tours for small groups and couples.
We'll never put you into a minivan or microbus.
Right.
People you do not know.
And they are customized private cars, always.
All the tours are customized and created for you. And that was the first video that you actually created, which still is running around in the world. And but it was always focused on creating your own story and getting, you can have all the experts in your life about wine, but it's not their palate that's tasting the Pinot, it's yours. And let's if it's your first journey out here, let's start your own story. And the story has been really important to us, and I think that's our clientele. They realize that, and that customization to find exactly where they need to go. I've been many times on a tour where they had this, what we call the usual suspects, I won't name them here, but the usual suspects list of where their friends told them they had to go because it's the best wine. And then we get done, we get to that first usual suspect, and we get to that spot, and then I watch them taste and learn what they're really liking. Now we're getting into regionality maybe here. That first stop was a stop where they get grapes from different regions. And then, they're liking this one. Now I know this next stop is on your list, but can I make a recommendation? And if we go to this recommendation, I think this is the reason why you're going to like it. And so, and then they'll say yes. And so we drive to the next recommendation. And then you see the response from them. It's like, this is where they needed to go. And we've had many tours where the people at the end don't want the tour to end. They're having so much fun. and I was having so much fun, especially our first year. And I didn't want the tours to end. But it's just like, the movie's got to wrap up. And so I would get there, and I would just say something. It just came out one day. I just said, well, you guys you really thought you knew where you wanted to go. I just took you where you needed to go. And it stuck. And that's exactly what we do almost every single tour. Especially the people that are we rarely have people that aren't enthusiastic when they leave because they've had such a good time. And that's just a reflection of what our company has developed into.
Right.
Simply.
Yeah. So
tell me about the early years of the business of once you got it started. What were some of the challenges you faced, and tell me about kind of finding that palette for what you wanted to do. What were some of the early challenges? What were some of the early successes? Was there a moment when you thought, this is something that's going to work for us?
Well, I mean, when we first started it, I did have an income coming in for myself through my internet marketing business that I was doing, which was supporting and making sure our bills were getting paid. And Mark was pretty much the main driver and guide.
Yeah, for a long time.
Right, because I mean, when you
Helen
start a
would talk to her on the
domain
phone,
name and a
then you got
website, yeah.
We were a good team. I mean, it was, I think the big challenge, maybe for any business that you're starting, especially with, it's 7 years, we just finished 7 years.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to our 8th year, But I think with a husband-wife team, we've had challenges just being husband and wife.
Right. Well, and
being a business partner. And but the big thing is just knowing what your roles are. And that was a challenge for me because there's expectations from both of us to learn certain things. But over time, it was, like when Helen and our accountant are talking together, it's just like I've got air in my head just whistling out of my ears. It's just like no idea what they're talking about. They're two peas in a pod. And they're just like, as long as they understand each other, I'm perfectly okay with that. That's her skill set. That's why she's a great manager. And my skill set was really out in the field. And
maintaining some of the website stuff. Because it's funny because I understand emailing and marketing that direction. And he's good at the HTML of
I can build
and the pictures, and he can build the website. And then we kind of come together between the writing of the content on the website. We kind of have to go back and forth and check up with each other on things that get done, and then
I remember when Helen was working and I was doing this, I was just like, imagine what it would be like if we actually treated this as a full-time job. And because we were doing great, and but it was that scary point where we decided, it was like our 3rd year, we decided we're doing this full-time, and there goes that income.
You go through a transition, both of us coming from parents that were depression age kids that grew up, and then so both of our parents were olders, born in the 30s, and both of our parents were a little bit older when they had us too. So we were brought up with that mentality. And for me, my father drilled into me as a kid, he tried to anyways, I don't know if it worked, that you need to have a good job. You go get a good education from college and you have a good job, and it needs to have benefits and it needs to support you, and you make sure that those things are covered in your life. And I was always the wild child, I guess, in my family. That, at least I was always told that. Because my thought process was I always wanted more, to be able to, I'm like, there's more to life than living in this 9-to-5 world. And did I do that? Yeah, I went there. That's what I had to do to get started, but it gave me the background. But I always had a piece of myself inside that was confident enough to do this, but yet it was a really scary leap to really go and say, can I let go of somebody else paying me and having those benefits and having that insurance, to creating it for myself and for our family. And there was a lot of mindset work that we went through, but all of it coincides with this little bit of a wake-up call. And this is where I look back at what happened with Chelsea. Is I don't think I could have gotten there without that boost of what happened to us, to push us this direction. And that's the gift I look at that she gave us, because it's pushed us to be able to have a mindset that says you can create for yourself anything you want. You can have it if you just put your mind to it and do it, and take the action to do it. And I live with that inside of me now every day, and I don't think I could probably go back to work for anybody else.
Right.
Unless it was part-time helping or consulting for them.
There's a point in your life where you are no longer employable.
Yeah. I feel like that's us now.
Yeah. I mean, we can help a lot of people create, and we've had a lot of people come to us for guidance for starting a tour company.
Yeah, actually we have.
And you never stand on your own shoulders. You're always standing on somebody else's. So we had tour companies that we didn't rely on, but we knew what they were doing. We didn't pay attention to them, but we knew what they were doing. And I think one of the it was John at Insider Wine Tours.
He's retired. He's retired now. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's still going out there. But one day I saw him at Soder Vineyards, and he just sat down next to me. He goes, "You guys have a great reputation out here." And I was just like, "Who are you?" And
right.
Obviously, something was going right, and we were doing something really well, and people were recognizing us just for being who we were. We weren't trying to outdo anybody. We weren't trying to make sure that, or we weren't trying to badmouth anybody. And but that's true with the wine industry out here, is that you don't see wineries trying to badmouth each other. And
never.
We're part of that, and we're part of that success story. So I think the challenge really was just getting past our personal demons, and build up each other to keep doing better at what we do. And what can you do better as a wine tour guide? Number one, don't call yourself a driver. You're more than that. We know the valley.
There's a huge separation between what we do and how we educate throughout the day and guide, show the geography. The places we pick are on purpose for our guests. We have conversations with them ahead of time, if at all possible. Do we get guests that come with their itineraries already in place? Yeah, that's fine. That's part of the gig. But in most cases, people have come to our website and found it. And the reason we developed our website to be full of a lot of content and information is so that they could read through it and see that we weren't just a driving service, getting you from location to location. We're going to educate you and give you history of this valley and education on the wines throughout the day, not just sit in our cars while they're in the tasting room tasting. We don't do that at all, unless we have to. But some places, if they have that appointment made, when we get to sit out in the car. But you know, we learned though. I mean, there was at the beginning we had to that's going into the appointments with our guests, listening to the winemakers, going to these little smaller boutique locations. It was so valuable. Like, we've done research and we're tasting the wines, but to listen to the winemakers themselves at each one of these appointments has developed this information set that's inside of us now that we can pass on to our guests.
And one thing I'll add to that is you learn early on. The challenge early on was being too much part of our guests' experience and allowing, it's kind of like our children, you know, allowing them to go to where we just took them and allowed them to be guests of theirs.
Yeah.
And not interfere, because we got them there and we're bringing them an opportunity. And I think that's the places that get us, I guess, realize that, is that we are bringing them an opportunity here. And this is somebody become a club member to buy more wine, to tell their story when they leave, you know. And they put their best foot forward when we show up, and I think that's a real credit to us. But that was part of us learning not to interfere. And I think maybe me more so than Helen, I had a tendency to kind of follow them in and interject. But like with Dan Warrensife, for example, at Utopia Vineyards, his tasting room is through the door, and that's where he's at. And so what I learned with him, besides his wealth of knowledge, is just to ask him specific questions that my guests weren't asking, or to lead them into asking more questions of him. And because Dan will answer any question with any opinion, whatever, and if you can ask him specific questions about the nuance of winemaking, because I already heard a lot of it, so I try not to ask Dan the same question twice, but tailor it to the group that has a question about maybe finances of vineyards.
Right, and you can have some of these conversations driving from location to location. So really paying attention to what your guests are asking and talking about in the car, and then being able to have that conversation carried on by the winemaker in that location. So we'd say, hey, we were just talking about XYZ topic as we were driving here. Can you expand upon that from your perspective? And then it starts things off in another whole nother way. Yeah.
I mean, I think we're the experts in taking what they want to do and get them to the right place so they can create their own story. And but there's no way I'm ever going to say that I'm going to take the place of Marcus Goodfellow or
the winemaker that makes the wine itself,
or Dan Warrensife, or any winemaker out there. One of my great friends right now is Tony Reinders.
We love Tony.
I will never.
Tony's awesome.
He's like.
He's making like half the wine in the valley right now.
But the importance, our relationship with that winemaker is invaluable, and to make it that they are the reason why they're here, not us. We're not the reason. So we got to be humble a little bit. It's like you see our picture on the website and everything. You know a lot more about us than we know about you. But we want you to know about the winemaker.
Sure.
We want you to know about the people that are making these great wines.
But I guess to get round circle about to finish off that whole question is just to it took time for the domain name and the traffic to our website to gain some traction. Our first tour we took out to get some photographs and have that social media, because that's a big thing. we called upon some of our best friends and said, let us take you out on a tour today and show you what we're going to do. So we'd have that, social atmosphere to start us off with. Now we have thousands of photos. We have a good Instagram and a following of our ugly green cup, which is a whole nother story. But it took a year or two, and then it finally was that point where we said, we just have to jump in and say, this is going to work for us, and there's enough coming in a monthly basis. And I had to learn how to budget too for the seasonality, because there is definitely seasonality to this business. And for us specifically as tour guides, we had to make sure that we account for those off-season months to be able to make it through.
Right. Mm-hmm, right.
And so that's something, that we were able to do. And, by the time we were 3-4 years into this, we completely replaced our corporate incomes from our jobs and from his beer sales and my restaurant management position. And we were able to qualify for a loan to buy our house with the bank.
That was a big deal.
That was a big deal. And saying I did it with my own business and I'm not being paid from, that was huge. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a big deal. Anyways, and now we live in the middle of this beautiful place, and we enjoy being able to say, if I want this day off next week, and we don't want to take a tour out, we can block it off of our calendar and we can do it.
Yeah,
and that's nice. Do we do that? Oh, not much, but
but you could.
But we could. We get a lot of time off in the wintertime, though. During the season, we just work our butts off in the summertime, and then the wintertime, like next week, we're leaving for a vacation that was well deserved, and to be able to do that and enjoy the holidays with our son,
like a lot of people
is
out here.
awesome.
We have so many friends right now that are just loving their life, that are like, that are winemakers or winemaker couples, and they are just getting out of Dodge because they've worked their butt off this whole 6 months, and they just need a break. And everybody leaves. It's just like in January, there's nobody here. But that's where we're at too. But we're always available. We're always open, except 12 months a year. That time off is getting shorter and shorter. To where we start booking in April and something like that. I think
we had our busiest November ever. And
October.
If we weren't going on this vacation, I'm not sure that this wouldn't be, just this next weekend before we even leave, is one of the busiest, makes this one of the busiest Decembers we've ever had, especially with the bookings that are coming up between the Christmas and New Year's holiday. And that's when a lot of wineries want to close. And I'm like, that's when everybody wants to come on tours. No.
The big challenge for, I think, is for other tour companies that are especially coming in, or just knowing your clientele. You got to know your clientele. You can't just throw mud against the wall, and because you're going to attract exactly what that clientele is. And that's a valuable thing to realize. Just saying, I don't want to have these types of people, then guess what? A lot of times you'll get those types of people. You got
law of attraction.
And you have a lot. When we first started, we were told we do not accept bachelorette parties. Okay, but from our perspective, that's not a very business. That's not a good business model to say I don't want bachelorette parties. You just have to look at what that clientele brings. When I know one bachelorette party with a group of ladies, great ladies, showed up and they had 6 Mercedes-Benz sitting in the parking lot, and I'm taking them on a wine tour. It's not just a matter of 12 individuals there, 13, because one was single or getting married, and everybody else knew that one. But everybody else was married, so I saw opportunity of 6 different or 5 different opportunities there at a future date.
Yeah,
that's how you look at it.
Yeah,
and that's I understand my clientele. They're maybe not every single one of them, but there was clientele there that could be possible. You know, I have to think about that when I can't judge people. You can't judge just because they're Canadians, they're not going to buy wine. You can't do that. It's a serious problem out here to classify certain people as not being buyers. And so I think that's part of understanding your clientele.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the pitfall is for a lot of businesses. And we learned that early on. And I think that's what's really driven us.
Yeah.
Just understanding that and being comfortable with it and getting excited about it.
Let's talk about building the relationships with the industry. As you mentioned, you kind of have your usual suspects, but I'm assuming you go to a lot of different places. You obviously know a lot of different people in the industry. So tell me about how the industry receives you and has received you, and building those relationships, and sort of the give and take it with you and these businesses as you are bringing them people, but also, you know, you are asking of their time as well. So how does that work out? How do you make it so it's worth their time and you can keep bringing people back?
Well, I think, I mean, we've gotten calls as time has gone on, as our business as we've built our reputation, from winemakers that have heard we do a great job and we bring good people. I mean, we get told, and I hope nobody's, you know, talking behind our backs, but we're told face to face, you know, to our faces, you guys are one of the most highly recommended ones, touring companies that are out here because of the way you guys do your business.
I remember one time driving up to Anderson Family with Cliff and Allison up there, and Cliff pulled me aside and he goes, "Guess what I found out today? I went on TripAdvisor." I said, "Really? That's good." And he goes, "And guess who's number one out here in the valley?" And I go, "Who?" He goes, "Cellar Door Wine." I'm like, well, that's cool. Cliff's been a huge supporter of us, but you know, we build a relationship. He didn't know us. We didn't know a lot of people out here.
Scott and Denise Flora from Native Flora, they called us up and they're like, we hear you guys do, you know, higher end wine tours. You know, at the beginning when we started this, we also had the backing of the Allison Inn and Spa. I mean, just because of my background working with them and everything, they supported, that was another piece of that pillar lifting up, and that's a pillar of support that they gave us as we started this. They did nothing but support us in anything we did, and they helped, you know, we're on their recommended tour list. The Atticus in McMinnville here, that, you know, you have to, you know, from a guide or a tourism perspective, you have to have the right insurance and have the right, you know, good cars that are up to date, and you have to have, you know, all of your Department of Transportation, things like that are a part of it that you have to have as an established guiding tourism business. But then just, the personal relationships that had already developed from the Allison was a big part in pushing us forward. Just going to these locations, sitting with the guests, learning from the winemakers, and just becoming their friends. And interacting throughout without information that wasn't overtaking that winemaker's place. Because we've seen it happen with some locations where we've heard that tour guides start to jump in and take over the whole entire conversation. And you have to, if you are going to sit inside with the guests and be part of this educational day with them, you have to learn to shut up at certain points too.
Isn't that why they develop apps for games?
Yeah. I mean, we have to stand back and say we've given all the information we can up to the point of getting them in the door. And I think that's a big part of that relationship building is they know that we have been educating them throughout the day. If we can lend to the conversation without overtaking the conversation from them. I think that's where the big shift is doing that, and then having quality people that are truly interested in the reason why they were brought to that specific location over and over again. You know, some places are wanting us to self-qualify or qualify those guests ahead of time. Are these going to be whales, or are they going to just be here for the tastings and a beautiful day? You know, so you have to. That's where a large part of our work is done, to make sure that we have picked the right locations for our guests. You know, if I have a group of ladies that are here for a birthday or just a girls' weekend out, and they want to pay maybe 2 or 3 in the group are just going to have the tasting fees at every place we go, and maybe only 1 or 2 in the group might be potentially buying a couple of bottles to waive their fees. There are certain locations you go to for that, and you're not going to go make a winemaker appointment for somebody that's going to become a club member or is a connoisseur and take them to that private appointment if that's not what they're, they want to sit and talk and just have a drink while they're looking at the beautiful views. So I think that's a large part of how they realize we do that work. We have those conversations with our guests ahead of time. We've done the due diligence to make sure that these people are in the right location for the wines that are being presented to them, and how they're being presented, so that they know we're not going to be wasting their time if it's an appointment, and they know to expect that this is just a group that's going to sit here and do their tastings today. And we try to call as well. You have open tasting rooms that don't require appointments for groups of 6 or less or anything like that, but we still like to call our places and say, hey, I'm coming with a couple in tomorrow, with just to give them a heads up that we're walking in the door with some people. And that lets them know, hey, there's always a friendly, hey, Helen, Mark, whichever one of us is driving, or even if it's one of our drivers.
It's really important to make that initial contact, and then when you do it, then they see the results.
Yeah.
I remember, I forget Martin's last name, but he's at Ponzi now, but he was at Penarash when we probably the second, third year that we were doing this. And you go into Penarash, that's a very busy place, and it can be. And you get there on a Saturday at 2 o'clock in July, and it's sunny. It's busy. And I remember Martin, granted he was taller than everybody else in the room, but he saw me walk through the door with, I think it was just 2 people at that time, and he made eye contact with me and he goes, and I said, ladies, I think it was 2 ladies, I said, ladies, follow me. And Martin took us over to a table and sat us there in amongst the chaos. And I learned something there, was that he realized what we bring. And the opportunity, that's why Martin he's an opportunist. And he realized what the chances are good that he's going to sell wine. And that's the bottom line. We're not trying to bring people out here just to see the valley. We want to make it a win-win. We want to make everything work. It's working for us, it's working for them, and we want to keep this ball rolling. And without putting pressure on our clients. We do have a motive here to, it makes us look good if we bring buyers.
Not everybody's going to be a buyer, though.
Right, but not everybody's going to be a buyer. But
you have to build the experience for what the guest wants.
Exactly.
You really do.
And so Martin did well in that day. And when you get individual attention among the crowd, you feel good. You feel like pulling out that pocketbook, that kind of thing. And that's not what's driving us, but that's part of building that relationship. And we are when we go to a place, we do get a lot of Mark and Helen, and we call them, how are you? I mean, we have a lot of great relationships with people that want us to come and be part of that. We have people that will get kind of irritated with us for not showing up. I remember Denise Flora one time. She came over to our house. We were having a housewarming, and she literally just goes, whack, hits me on the arm. It's like, where have you guys been? And I'm like,
we haven't had the right guests to bring to you.
We haven't had the right clientele for you. We're not just going to bring you people. And, but, you know, she did that because she's a friend of ours, but she wasn't a friend of ours before we started this business.
Yeah.
And so I think naturally we just build relationships. And you can't be afraid of people, that's for sure.
No.
But you got to be able to not be able to, you got to be able to know where you are in that relationship.
And we also, on the other side of all of it, we have to go out and do our due diligence and taste the wines at these locations because they're ever changing. You know, Pinot Noir is one way one week, and then the next week you taste it again, you're like, oh, this is not the same wine I tasted last week, depending on whether, you know, if you're looking at biodynamic calendars or whatever. There's so much that changes even within a month or two's time frame in the bottles and the tasting menus. So we have to
Vintage changes.
Yeah. You have to stay on top of that. I mean, from an information perspective, the tour guides in this valley, if they're doing their jobs and they're doing them right, you have to stay on top of that piece of it too. You know, and if we don't necessarily get to go through a whole entire place's tasting and it's been a little while, and my guests are like, I can see like ebbs and flows start to happen sometimes too with wines, and guests liking a place really, really well one month, and then the next month they're going, this isn't, they don't buy anything. And you're like, well, the experience with the person behind the counter didn't change, so what's going on, you know? So then I'm back in that tasting room tasting the wines to find out where they're at, what's going on, and that's an important piece of it too. And I think, you know, all of the locations we go to, we have to stay on top of that kind of thing too.
Did you mention, I can't remember if you did, we'll get especially the smaller places, places that are less, or, you know, under 5,000 cases, even 1,000 cases. They'll call us just to, can you please come out here? Because our reputation's there. Can you come out here and try our wines and see if we'll be a fit?
Yeah.
And that's a real important question because we're not a fit with everybody. We make that determination a lot of times, but it's not so much, and we try their wines, and it's not so much to try their wines because it's free wine, which is great, you know, but it's to understand what they're doing.
Right.
The one thing that's true, I was in the beer business for 9 years, so the one thing that's true about a brewery, if you like beer, is because it's so consistent. It doesn't, there's no vintage in beer. You can create one, but there's no intended vintage in beer. Where you don't have consistency like that in winemaking, but you do, I mean, in wine. But the winemaker definitely is consistent.
Yeah.
What directions that winemaker want to go. And so when people come out there, we've done it many times. We go out there, we try the wine, and say out of 10, maybe 2 will stick. Because are they doing something that is, we're not looking for anything that's unique or like something that's separating them from the others. It's like, what are you doing here that's going to actually make me want to come back? Is it any different? I had one guy in my car once, and I always tell the story that he was nobody really that important in life, except his title was general manager for all the wine in the United States for Southern Wine and Spirits. Nobody important. And people are like, sounds important. Well, he just told me something very simply, and I've used this is years ago. He told me this, but he said, I really don't pay attention to tasting notes. I pay attention to if the wines I buy are the ones that I will get a second glass of. Mm-hmm. And that's whenever I go to a tasting appointment that somebody wants us to come out here and pair people with it, I ask myself that question. Are any of these wines here something I would get a second glass of if I'm in a restaurant or anywhere else? And that's my criteria.
Yeah.
I'm not a somm, far from it. But I think the most that I've seen analysis paralysis out in the field where people are just trying to figure out, this is a 94 from Wine Spectator, why don't I like it? It's a simple question. Do you like it or not?
I just don't like it.
I don't.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yep.
And so you can read all the tasting notes you want,
Yeah.
but if you don't like it, then that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And so, it becomes a very personal thing. And as we develop into going with people coming out here, I tell that to people all the time.
Right.
It's your palate. It's your palate. It's your palate. It's not
Right.
mine. People ask me, what's your favorite wine? My favorite wine doesn't matter.
Right.
I will get you to where your favorite wine is.
And I think, our goal at the end of the day, I'd say majority of our guests are coming out here because they've had a Willamette Valley blend of some sort in their marketplace. A cuvee from a mix of vineyards all over this area, that they've gotten their hands on somewhere. And then when we get them here and we have the conversations with them, we want them to understand what this valley truly is all about. Because it's about the terroir. It's about these little special mountainous regions that we have here. And I can talk about them and I can show them the maps. But until they're truly like in them and seeing them and feeling that atmosphere of that terroir, they don't get it until they're here. And so I think that's another thing that a lot of these places realize, that that's something we're doing, is we try and pick locations. If I have a guest that's that demographic of saying we've had Willamette Valley wines from Domaine Serene, the Yamhill Cuvée, or we've had a Rex Hill or a Stoller, or even a Penerash, something that's a Willamette Valley blend that's out there in that marketplace that they can get on their shelves, that's in distribution. But we really have, maybe they've had a special bottle on a wine list at one of their favorite restaurants that they go to in New York or Chicago or something. They're like, we had this one bottle of Beaufrere, and I'm like, okay, now you're getting more specific. But even Beaufrere has a Willamette Valley blend, So getting them and saying, let's look at, we can pick a day that we can get to the Chehalem Mountains, we can get them to a Ribbon Ridge, a Yamhill Carlton, and a Dundee Hills. We can hit 4 AVAs in a day. And within that 4 AVAs, we can show them wine terroir specific with an estate location. We can give them a vertical with a place that might have some vertical type of with their, and get them something that has a little bit more age. I can get them to a location that will show them clonal specific bottlings. And then I can even get them to some places that might have different winemakers from the same terroir and how that affects wine. So it's so cool to be able to put that together for a person in one day, and design, and I have specific places that I know I would go to for that kind of a day. And then they let us do that. But people are, the winemakers, that relationship piece happens because they know we're doing that educational piece throughout the day with them. And they're asking questions and really learning, okay, I like this Jory soil terroir.
So cool to watch.
Yeah.
I mean,
Or
it's
they
what
start to
beats me
realize
out.
they get to the Ribbon Ridge and they have that marine sedimentary, the Willackenzie soils, and they're just like, this is different taste. This tastes so different, and then there's so many other things that go into it, but it's fun to watch a person throughout the day. And I think the majority of our guests show that enthusiasm from us when they go into the locations is part of it too.
You try. You got to be careful though. You can't oversaturate people.
You can.
With information.
Yeah, you can.
Just because our enthusiasm is there doesn't mean that they need to know every bit of your enthusiasm.
Yeah. And
because I try to categorize it is number one, and we do it in the initial phase before we even do the itinerary. And to some extent, we've done it so much that it's second nature to us now, where we go. But once you get on the tour, you get the people in the car. Now they're yours, you know. And you try to find out the simple little things besides chit chat. Trying to find out from my perspective, what's their wine experience? You know, not just going to Napa. What bottle of wine changed your experience? You know, and not everybody has my story, you know. It's something completely different. But I think it's important for me and for them to understand where they're going.
Yeah.
And because they're going somewhere today, I just want them to hopefully at the end have a journey at the end. And they want to continue that journey. And so then you introduce something like, well, this first stop we're going to is all the wine that you're going to try today is out the window from that vineyard, like Linnaea Estate. I mean, perfect example. They try all these Pinots and Chardonnay, but it all comes from that vineyard. That's in the Yamhill Carlton AVA. But it's a very specific part of the Yamhill Carlton AVA.
Yeah.
And so you can taste so that's, for me, gives me a good idea of, do they like not just the vineyard, but also the region? And then you take that and go to Utopia in Ribbon Ridge. All the wine, except for his, he does source grapes from Southern Oregon for specific wines, but they're not Pinot or Chardonnay. And you go there and you try the Pinots there. He does a lot of whole clustering and stuff, but not every single one. And you try that, and then you've got two different regions, vineyard specific and regional specific. And then you can do the same thing in Dundee Hills. You can do the same thing with Chehalem Mountains. You can do the same thing with Amity Hills, McMinnville, and now Van Duzer. So that's what I try to do. And then I watched this, and then I remember one time it was a open house weekend. Beacon Hill, the winery there, had a bunch of Drew Voigt was there at one point. And he did brands for a lot of different wineries. And so Beacon Hill just opened up their tasting room upstairs. And so I can't remember, I think his first name is Mark, but he was the tasting room manager way back when. And he saw me and he goes, "Do you know anybody that I have a case of wine left, 2 cases of wine left, and it's a Chehalem Mountain, this vineyard." And it just so happened the guy that there was a couple that we had, but the guy he liked wine from the Chehalem Mountains, and I could tell where we were at. He was just loving them. And then I said, "I'll be right upstairs." And I went down and I got him. And I said, "I want you to try a wine." I didn't tell him where it was from or anything else. I just said, "I need you to try this wine. It's if you like it, you can get a special price on it, because he's going to give me a special price for you." And so he comes upstairs and he tries the wine, and I'm thinking he's going to love this wine because it's Chehalem Mountains. And I don't know if it was Jory soil or Chehalem Mountains, a lot of different soil types. But so he tasted it, and one thing we both learned is that your body will give away.
Your body language tells a lot, yeah.
This is the best brown bag scenario I could possibly do. And he tasted it, and he just held the glass. I'm like, "You know where this is from?" And he goes, "No." And I said, "Chehalem Mountains. You like it, don't you?" And he's like, "Yes. How much for the case?" and then I kind of walked away, and then Mark came in and talked to him, as I was just kind of standing there, he just kind of went, "Good job." And he went and got his case. And but that's the importance of regionality out here. And I've had winemakers tell me that regionality doesn't matter, and I see what their point is, because Willamette Valley matters. But they're just looking at it from that macro point of view, not the micro side. And I remember one, Tony's assistant, Ben, Tony Reinder's assistant, Ben, he was talking about Willamette Valley wines with people. He goes, "I don't see why the regions make a difference." And then he didn't really know what we did. And I said, "Well, on our tours, we have four stops in a day. We try to get 4 different regions.
If we can. Yeah.
So, because most people have a palate of Willamette Valley.
In 2 days, we'll get
But
7.
Most of the wine that
We need
comes up
2 days
here-
at least, though.
Right. But most of the wine that comes out of the Willamette Valley comes from these now 7 sub-AVAs. And the majority of that really comes from the Dundee Hills. So you're not really getting Willamette Valley necessarily. Because if you get less than 90% right now from the Dundee Hills, you have to call it Willamette Valley. So you can get Ribbon Ridge and Dundee Hills, 50%, you call it Willamette Valley. But they're coming from 2 specific regions. So break that down a little bit and see what you're really liking. And they're all great regions. It's just so cool to see people actually gravitate to one.
Yeah, it is.
And
then from there, we can guide them again.
then we could talk about,
We can guide them for their next visit back,
Right.
or we can make sure for their purchases in the future, if they're buying and having it shipped to their locations. These are the
we just
wines
talked
that you
about
need to
regionality
look
there.
at.
We didn't talk about vintage. We didn't talk about clones.
Then there's all of that.
Yeah, and there's all of that.
Yeah.
And microclimates, and doing things like that, because
Cooperage programs.
once they get the region down, now it's a matter of, do you like cool vintage? Do you like warm vintage? What are you really gravitating to? That's where their journey is. And that we get most people just trying to figure out the regionality of it. Then their journey begins and comes, and then we get people coming back for the 3rd time, and they're still on the journey. And that's what's exciting for me, is that we're tour guides, we're bringing people on a lifelong process, and
Yeah.
that's wine. So there's the
Yeah.
answer to why wine, right there.
Yeah.
So tell me about how you've seen the industry, especially locally, since you're valley based. Tell me how you've seen the industry change since you've been aware of it, since you've been a part of it, especially, and also alongside that, how you've seen the tour industry change and grow as you've been a part of
A
it.
lot of changes in the tour industry, for sure.
What was the first part? I mean, 2 separate parts here.
Sort of how the wine industry has grown and changed, and then how the tour industry has grown and changed as a result.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is a story I tell to my guests on a daily basis. You know, when they get in the car, we talk about what is an AVA and what, the Willamette Valley. So we have AVAs, are American viticultural areas, and our first vines were only planted in 1965
Up here in the Willamette Valley.
in the valley with David Lett and the Irie Vineyards. And 1984 is when it was established as an AVA. So that's almost 20 years time frame that it took for this valley to kind of get into motion for that AVA structure to start taking place.
Yeah.
And when they started, it was just those 5 founding fathers that we had. Wineries that there was more vineyards than that, but founding fathers and wineries that got those things going to get it to be called an AVA. And
It's an interesting history, that's for sure.
yeah, and our family's vineyard was planted in 1989. So
July 4th.
Yep, July 4th, 1989 is when we've got pictures of them out there. And it was, that's 10 years before I even came into the family, so I didn't know them back then when they first planted it, but I'm happy I'm here now.
Yeah.
But I think in 89 there was less than 100 still, so
And there were no regions besides Willamette Valley.
yeah.
And,
Then you see sorry.
Ribbon Ridge was still Willamette Valley. When you look at
Well, the smaller sub-AVAs
Chehalem.
didn't become until 2005 and 6.
Right.
I mean, so yeah, you look at that, that's only
4, 5,
like,
6.
that's 14, 15 years ago. Yeah, so that progression really is young.
Well, just think of the Dundee Hills.
Then you look at 5 founding fathers and with 65 being the first plantings, and then the early 70s with those guys establishing, or 72, 73 are when we still talk about there are some own-rooted vineyards around this area that are still, surviving with the phlox virus. It's still being here, but then less than 100 or so in that area, 89 when our family first planted, and then you jump into I feel like I've seen just looking at the history myself, I feel like there was like 10-year surges.
Yeah, every
where you've got early 90s,
2000, 2010.
Then you have the 2000 group of people that got in once those AVAs were really established. I think you saw that insurgence right there. And then now here we are, 2019, and we're over 500 wineries and 700 plus vineyards in the valley. So when we talk to our guests about that, I'm like, that doesn't necessarily mean it's gigantic vineyards like you see in Napa. You don't have thousands and thousands of acres lined up down a highway. Our geography won't ever allow that. So some of those vineyards, when you hear that number, means they could be 5-acre vineyards. They're small.
Yeah,
they're still going to be boutique.
15, 10, 5 acres.
Yeah, exactly. And then for winery labels, that doesn't necessarily mean it's it's a winemaker that's out there that has this passion to do these wines, and they're sourcing from those vineyards, and they may only be doing 500 cases, 600 cases, or less for that matter. They may source, but if it's a commercially produced label, it's in that number. And so you had this group of farmers, looking at our family's history and just knowing the Ribbon Ridge as well as we do. Ed and Darlene at Araminta Cellars, I love talking to them, but they started out as cherry orchards and hazelnut orchards.
Cattle ranchers.
And then they were a Angus cattle farm, and then the Angus cattle thing wasn't giving them the deferments they needed, so they went into a long-term. They decided to do a long-term agreement with Archery Summit, and they planted 20 acres of grapes. And that wasn't, that was in 1999, 2000 when they did that. So, they were farmers before that have changed now that these AVAs have taken shape and they've transferred over, or ranchers that might have been in those little AVAs have sold those farms to vineyard owners now. And
there's a lot of stories of where everybody came from, because if you look at, when we live in Colorado, live out here, you see a lot of people from California. And the one thing that, I tell people, so did you grow up out here? I said, no, I'm in the wine industry, therefore I didn't come from Oregon. And I'm from Washington State. But Washington State, same way. There's a lot of California there. And I always refer to Dan Warrensize, but he literally tells the story of, I looked at a magazine one day and said that Oregon's where it's at. And he was in California. He had a thriving business down there selling wine, making wine, but he always wanted to be a vineyard owner and a winemaker there. And he says, that dream left me a long time ago in California.
Yeah.
And a lot of these winemakers up here, there's no way they could do it in California. They did it here. You see a lot of people in the high-tech industry that afforded it to be able to do this. They cashed in their chips and bought land, became farmers. And they're making great wine now.
Yeah.
Or the grapes are, and that's where I've seen that's probably the change from, like you're called the founding fathers, the original people that were out here. The first time they established these vineyards in the Willamette Valley, and then as people could, no one gave them much credit at the time, and they were doing things that, I mean, the Ponzi's. I mean, no one knew what they were doing out here.
Well, they planted down on unelevated flatland. You know,
they knew what they were doing. They had a vision.
Right.
Nobody else gave them any credit.
But Louisa will sit there and say, she goes, my parents didn't know any better. We didn't have the data. They only had a few clones that were brought over from Burgundy to start with, that were approved to be planted. So there was this transition that had to happen of learning our growing and agriculture with these clones from France. How are they going to work here? And then our soil is so diverse. I mean, we have, I always try and keep it general with the categories because it's way too intricate for most people to take in, but we keep it to the wind-blown loess, to volcanic soils, Jory being our state soil, and marine sedimentary soils. To keep it just for people to understand it, and then you can dive into that 1,000 times deeper. But to see how it's grown, you've had to take on years of these farmers understanding that piece of it, what clones grow in the right soils, at the right elevations, at the right facings of the vineyards, right? And then now we have a lot more clonal diversity that's been brought over that are specific for and they're really figuring that thing out. So you're
doing clones of the rootstock grafted onto
so that is a huge change from then to now.
They were just winging it back then. Now it's very scientific, very driven that way.
And now but you also have all of these winemakers that have come in, and I can't even say I've tasted a quarter of them. We deal with vineyard owners and tasting rooms that are at locations at their terroir spot. But there's so many wines that are being made out there that are in distribution. I know when I've had a call from a guest that says, I had da-da-da-da-da wine and I've never heard of it. I'm like, okay, they're either way down south by Eugene, or it's a tiny little guy that got his wine into a distribution market and he makes a few hundred cases, and it's not even a tasting room that's available here. We can't even get those wines here. And I'm like, how does that happen?
It's amazing. You can't even make an appointment.
I'm like, I want to try that wine now, you know? And I can't even find their phone number on a website sometimes. I'm like,
We deal with a lot of percentages out here, and I think a lot of the misconception is that you can get any wine you want, where it's like people want bubbly and stuff like that. It's like, people do it, but they only make 20 cases of it. They're not going to open it up, You
can go buy the bottle and then they'll open it, maybe.
But maybe not 20 cases. They probably do more of that. But the reality out here is 75% of all Oregon wine is 1,000 cases or less. I mean, they're not talking about huge numbers here, and so you can count on your hands how many actually are above 15,000 cases.
We're pretty close to it. Maybe 3 hands.
Maybe. But the numbers go really down. What you see out in the marketplace outside of Oregon are these places that can sustain that kind of distribution. It's just a handful. Does that mean they're getting the best out here? Maybe. But to say that those that can distribute outside of Oregon and get their name out there are the best, that's a stretch to me. And there's so much good winemaking going on in here. So when somebody gets written up and they literally make 500 cases of wine a year, and they're not in distribution, but they got a 97 from Wine Spectator, 94, doesn't matter, 92, doesn't matter. They are getting recognized. And we can't even get them. If you get a 97, no one's ever going to get that. but
Yeah.
it doesn't matter who makes it. But
That 100
a
that Patty
collector will
Green
get it
got.
all. Nobody's going to taste that one. But when you look at the sheer number of volume of grape juice compared to California and Washington State, Oregon is very small. And Oregon makes 1% of all the wine in the United States, 1%. And they get 25 to 30% of all the awards. There's a lot of great winemaking going on in this state.
There is.
And it is not falling just in a handful of locations.
Yeah.
I can't emphasize this enough. The assistant winemaking out here, the people that are actually doing the bulk of the work, is incredible. And those guys and ladies, whoever you want to call them, the cellar masters that are out there
Cellar
really
hands.
doing this, they are absolutely doing some great stuff. They're making the head winemaker look really, really good. But that head winemaker hired them.
Right.
And, that's why I look at like Tony Reinders. You look at all the great winemakers that are out here now, he hired when he was starting at Domaine Serene.
Right.
And they're doing their own thing now. And what's cool about Tony is that he knows them all.
Right.
He remembers them, but he doesn't look at that. He's doing his own thing. And he's got a great assistant now. And more, It's amazing the lineage of great winemaking out here that's produced more great winemaking. And it's just an incredible area. So for us to get a phone call from somebody who only makes 400 cases of wine, I'm really interested.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think it was Bjornson Vineyard, they sell their grapes too. And Jerry down there gave me a bottle from one of I can't remember the name of the winery right now, but made in Beaverton.
It was, just over, on the
It would
Hillsborough,
never be part
Beaverton
of our
side
route,
of Chehalem Mountains.
Yeah, and it blew me away.
It was awesome.
And then I looked at who
Yeah.
made it. It was their son. He's in his 20s. And there's some lineage that's happening here, and there's a lot of youth out here that are understanding this. The best youth I can think of, and I'm really excited, is Granville Wines.
Jackson Holstein.
Jackson Holstein,
Yeah.
his wife Ayla, and Al Holstein was he wrote the book on vineyard management out here. So he didn't have any shoes really to fill. He was already in the shoes. Jackson talks about being, his crib was the tractor in the vineyard. And that's a story I can never have.
Oh, no.
And when we go to Jackson, he's one of those guys that calls us up, can we be a fit in your wine tours? I'm like, well, let's try your wine. And let's hear your story. And Jackson, he sent me text after a tasting. He's like, sorry about if I talk too long about the story. I'm like, oh, I totally understand that. But when I go to the tasting, and I'll just let you know that I'll ask questions to make sure you're telling your story. Because that is not just showcasing your wine. You are what's in that bottle of wine.
Yeah.
You really are.
And it's what sells the wine. 9 times out of 10, our guests are just, they're humbled by these stories of these winemakers in these locations. Yeah.
I think that's a big change in the Valley that's another change in the Valley, from being recognized as, well, we've been here so long, respect us, to we haven't been here that long, please respect us. We get people, I think another way of looking at it is that people ask us or tell us, we want to have one high-end place, and then it's like, and then I'll get them in the car and I'll talk to them about what I think high-end is.
What does high-end mean? Because that's a broad
if high-end
spectrum.
means that they have a manor on the hill and you're paying a high price for a bottle of wine, that's one definition of high-end. But if I'm asking, if you're a winemaker in the Willamette Valley and you're not a high-end winemaker, what are you doing out here? And
Yeah.
that's the reason why it's so good. There's no low-end wine. There's nobody I know saying, well, I'm only making wine to go to the middle of the road. There's an audience out there for that. Yeah, that's called the bottom shelf in the Safeway store. They've already got that covered. You don't need to be there.
No.
And you know the ones that are like I said, out of 10, 2 will go to. It's not that they're not good, but what are they? What's their focus, and what are they doing to make them relevant? You know, and I think there's a big push out here with youth, with enthusiasm, with technology, and everything else that Willamette Valley is going to be relevant for a long, long time because the winemaking out here is so good.
Yeah, but that also brings up a point that as you come into this marketplace, if you're a newer winemaker, there's no place to make mistakes anymore either. Because as this grows and grows, the ones that are not showing up to the level of what this valley has produced thus far and will continue to produce, you can't just, I feel like you can't just walk in and just say, I'm going to start making wine. Like maybe an Araminta did 20, 30 years ago.
Great story.
You know, you can't just start doing that and expect to not have some, definitely like some ups and downs, unless you got some background, I would say, because there have been some we have tasted that are newer, and I'm like, ooh, I don't know about this one.
Well, I think too,
you've got competition as far as the quality goes.
When we first started a touring company, the only education out here was Schmidt. And now you have Linfield, and that's a huge splash. And the focus is to hopefully keep people here. But I think, especially in the 80s and 90s, there was no focus on education. And the level of education reflects the economy too. It's a very strong economy out here. It has been for a long time. People work here, they make a living wage here, they spend the money here. It keeps everything flowing. And you can look at the level of education of people even working in the field. And you need people that have a good grasp of numbers, even working in the field as a vineyard manager. They have to be able to have the aptitude to go into sciences, you know, chemistry or biology, things like that. And so they are driving this industry. But you have to have something locally that is helping them drive that industry. And that's where, like, the Evanstats saw that need. And coming in here and doing that in Linfield, you know, that was, and the Ponzi's have been doing that for a long time. On the philanthropic side, they did on the facility side with Carlton Winemaker Studio. So just by that was bringing people.
Well, then you've got like Bethel Heights, Castiles, and you have Joe Dobbs. They've developed the trucks. And now with the truck that now does all of this champagne, the sparkling wine, the degorgement, it's awesome. I mean, those are all things that have like made winemaking easier for the little small guy throughout this area too. So there's these developments in technology and how we can do our bottlings and do our labeling and move the wine from marketplace to marketplace too. That's really changed for the need of what this specific variety, these cool climate varietals, the Chardonnays and the Rieslings
in touring companies.
So yeah, with tourism, I feel like there's two different ways to look at it. You have tourism that's like based out of Portland. You have limousine companies and driving services. So they get lumped into that. And that's not obviously us. I can tell when somebody calls me up and they're like, what kind of car do you have? And I'm like, are you looking for a limousine and a driver? Or do you want somebody that's going to educate you? And they're like, well, we just want a driver for the day. And I'm like, I'll dive into the questions of what is their day entailing, but if it's that bachelorette party that is just out to be driven to the 99W drag, there's a service for that, and we aren't always the right fit. and I'm not a limo. We are not a limo service for that reason, but. That's where, that's a big difference, where when we jumped into this 7 years ago and I said, this is what I want out of my day, there's a handful of us that do tours the way we do, that have this specific passion for the wines themselves, ourselves, as well as being able to educate the people of this area, to give them the passion that we have for it in a day, give them that true experience with the places we pick versus that driving service. So we are seeing more and more transportation companies kind of come into the marketplace for sure, which are just those driving services. But I hear, and every single year, and even when we first started, we kind of got told, we'll see if you make it, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
There's,
like any business.
It's a business, one, we're small. So luckily we had a background that was conducive to starting this business. I understood what, my articles of incorporation needed to be. I understood marketing and a website. I did. I understood the business side of it. And Mark has a big sales background, and for that matter, being in a restaurant, it's all about sales. Everything you do is about sales, and selling yourself, as well as selling, the products around you. But
I think that another thing too is, and I've tried to get people aware, try to take notice of it, but. I think in the old school of thinking is that they didn't need us, touring companies. Not as much as they gave credit. But then you look at the numbers of what we bring, and what we bring to places, literally, is brand new business. And when you, say in a 6-month period, and you visit a place 20 times in a month, and then you're in that 20 times, 15 of them did club memberships, or they bought more. Maybe some didn't buy any, but when you look at that number, if we didn't bring those 20 to you, that's just take that number away 20 times. And if you keep repeating that, that's a huge amount of money for those locations. So
that would have maybe never found those people because they would have never, they were off the grid, and we brought them to that grid.
So if you took away touring companies, let's say, and you had them just do it on their own with people driving out here, it would be significantly different. I am implying it would be significantly different. I think the value between the relationship between the touring company and the locations has gotten better. But I think the one thing that comes with that is the touring companies that are coming in now aren't realizing that they're a steward of those people too. So they're not. So when they're going into a location, they're leaving it just like the old adage is that mom and dad told you, is that if you're going someplace, leave it cleaner than when you left. When you leave it cleaner when you got there. I don't think there's a lot of tour. I think the tour companies that are getting it are doing a great job.
They do that.
They do that. But when you bring in more, it's kind of a riffraff feel. And
that's the difference between a transportation tourism company versus we're a small breed of group of people that do it the way we do it. And that's, I think all of us that do the tours the way we do, that have the knowledge and background that we do, we all work really well together. And we, if we're full, we know we'll push them to the right people to make sure that this guest is getting the right ones. So I think as the valley as a whole, as it's growing, we're going to see more and more of these transportation companies just be drivers out here. But from an experience, for us, I don't know that that's going to grow as much. And for us as a small company, I'm particular, obviously, in if I'm going to have, we've had a hired driver the last 3 years now. For 2 of the years, it was Matt Driscoll from Wild Air, his sister, and she was fantastic because she worked with her brother and she understood the whole winemaking. Yeah, she was interested and she had the same passion as we did, and we felt that, and that's why we had her working with us. And then this last summer, a good friend of mine who's been in this area for years, she lived in Sherwood, so she was very close by and has always had a passion for the wine. And she happens to be that very first tour we took out when we first started this business. So she went, her and her husband went into retirement this last year. So, we only have a place to have a hired driver really in the summertime. The seasonality of the business doesn't allow for, the other thing we've never really done, we have to really look at our particular story. Those first 3 or 4 years and even 5 years, I mean, with the trauma and loss of our daughter, it's been a journey to just get to where we are. And for the longest time, I was like, I don't want to take this on as me being that manager of a business. I love driving people. I still have to do that piece of it, but I can manage that piece as well as being a guide out there. And so I look at, if we were to expand and I start hiring extra drivers, I have to have that training in place and know that these people that are doing what we have developed Cellar Door Wine Tours to be giving that same experience as Mark and I. And that's always a really hard thing when you're a business owner. So, because there's a reason we have the passion for it, but does every person we hire underneath us have that same passion?
Sure.
Yeah.
So there's a fine line for us to kind of we've really just kept it small. And right now, our brother-in-law, Chuck, who's one of the North Block owner of the vineyard, he just retired from his job, and as he helps Patricia with some of the vineyard management stuff, he's going to maybe drive for us a few times here or there. Awesome. So that is super cool for us to keep this more family and to be able to say to our guests, hey, you're going to have a vineyard owner driving you today, so no worries there. Yeah.
He actually told me that he wanted to work for us, so
we're pretty excited. Nice. I think he's looked at what we've done over the course of this time frame, and he's been the family at the vineyard has been extremely impressed with what we've done on our side of things too, and we've all supported each other through it. So
I don't see, it's a small valley. I mean, it's a small production. I don't see a tour company like Platypus Tours that's down in the Bay Area that has all these cars and coming out here and doing a tour like that. I think it's going to be more specialized and focused because we've come to that point of scaling and what do we do, and if we want to take over this valley, it's either go big or just stay where we're at.
Right, and we would maybe need an investor if we went that direction, at least to get us started off. But it's just, do we want that to make that decision or not? And at this point, we love what we're doing, the way we're doing it, and it's working great for us. And hey, why not be the one that's sought after? Just like these little hidden gems are around the valley.
The one thing I will, one of my tours, again, he was nobody important. He was in charge of all the ammunition and everything in the Pacific Fleet, and we were struggling whether or not we wanted to hire an employee, and he goes, from my experience, he's one of those guys that's just like, but I learned two things. One, ask if you want his advice, you know. So I ask people if they want my advice first. Just give it. He goes, "You want some advice?"
Except when it's me.
Sure. And then I said, "Sure." And he says, "You win with people," because he has to rely on these people all the time.
Yeah.
And he says, take it or leave it. But if you want to grow your business, you win with people. And that was enough for me. I mean, that was.
Yeah.
And we hired Ann, and it was for me. It's like, and then she did a great job, and she took the reins, and there was a transition, but you know, she developed into making her own decisions, because that was a big thing for us.
Yeah,
they could actually not call us. Make a choice to change the itinerary.
Right, we
based
wanted
on
them.
Your knowledge and your experience.
I mean, she would always be really good about going, well, Helen and Mark really listened to what you said and develop this to be the way you want it. But at the same time, I'm like, Anne, if you see them going a totally different direction with the wines that that they're tasting and they're not liking something, go the other direction. You know these wineries. Like, empower her to take and be confident in her skills, knowing the wines and that she's been working with.
And then it got really annoying because I was wondering if I was ever going to get another TripAdvisor review, because Anne was hogging it all. Helen would hog it all. I'm just like,
it's funny how those come in. Sometimes they come in bulk with one person, one right after another, and it's like, why didn't he get reviewed for his tour that day? Who knows?
And that's another change in the valley is how, and it's probably true with wineries, but I think with tour companies is
TripAdvisors
is getting reviewed and making sure your reviews are good and what you do to ensure the good reviews are, and I think that keeps our level of service high, because that's employees. They can just get a paycheck, but reviews from when we first started to now you have to have good reviews.
Well, and we always have, but
yeah. But that's
when you love what you do and you're passionate about it, and it shows in what you're giving every day, you have nothing to worry about. That's the way I look at it. Yeah.
I don't know if there's any other real changes.
Yeah.
I just think it's going to be small.
I mean, for us, it's different because we are that small, unique little group, and that little small, unique group for us is always going to be there, and it's never going to fall into a competition category with those transportation companies.
No.
So the only thing I can see is I look at what those companies charge, and then I look at what I'm doing and the information and guidance that I'm giving, and I'm like, I should be charging double because they're getting double than just that driving service. That's the hard part for us, is that because we're small, it is a small group of clientele in the whole demographic of what comes out here that is looking for somebody like us. And
well, I think the reviews are corresponding with the value they're getting. So
well, that's part, but at the same time, when you have a driving service that's charging the same amount, and we give a lunch with ours, unless they want to do a paired tasting experience, we provide lunches through Red Hills Market out of Dundee, and make sure that their picnic is at a winery at a location, so we're not being pulled into a town, because really the vineyards are in the country, and we show them the back roads. We get them into driveways they would never find, and be able to experience and sit down and have that fun day with what we're giving them.
And breaking up for lunch on a Saturday in July or August is, you could take 2.5 hours out of your day.
Yeah, to go into those restaurants. So it's better served getting it and just bringing it out there and enjoying the place you're in. Yeah.
Sure.
Keep it moving.
It's been successful for us, and I don't see us changing that anytime soon.
Yeah.
But we're flexible with what the clientele wants.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're established.
So yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, that's all the questions I have. You actually answered almost all my questions that me haven't asked them, which is great. Thank you. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that we should have covered?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so. I mean, that's our story in a nutshell. Yeah.
You didn't
It's
ask us about our dogs and how they're.
Oh no, the ugly green cup.
Oh, the ugly green cup.
I thought about the ugly green. So tell us about. Well, let's finish with the ugly green cup.
Okay.
Well, I think it was Linnae where I didn't bring my prop, and I have a plastic ugly green cup.
Go to Instagram. You can find it.
I think it was Linnae. Anyway, who's at Linnae?
Eric?
Sorry, Eric. I think he texted me and he said, "Get this ugly green cup out of here." He left it, and so I went back, and I think it was the next day, and I got it, and but I'm drinking a lot of water, so
as tour guides, we're drinking water instead of wine during the day.
I had this cup, and I was like, this cup has been left at so many locations. It's got its own story, and I'm just gonna do an Instagram post on it on our Facebook, our Instagram Cellar Door Instagram page.
Yeah.
And I just started posting the ugly green cup originally at a location. Now guess where he's at, or it's at.
And yeah, I need like blur the background so it was like a distinctive piece of that vineyard
do, like,
maybe,
4
but
different
but
pictures.
blurred, so it was kind of harder to tell.
And so
that wasn't
But the cup looked really good in this picture, and people, and I started getting this following. It's incredible how it just took off. And then I started his own Instagram page, which hasn't taken off as much as on our Cellar Door page.
Right.
But it will eventually. Then I started getting these guesses in from like the winemaker and the
Or
owner of the place
tasting room
saying,
associates and
"This looks
stuff like
just
that."
like my place," and I'd say, "Nope, you're wrong." So I thought maybe it's not a good idea, because if I get people guessing that are important in this area and they're guessing wrong and it's not, they think it's their place.
We had one that kind of told us that. He goes, I was afraid to actually comment because I started to realize maybe I don't know as much as I thought I did.
So I think my intention was good, but it kind of backfired. But it got this cup out here that suddenly I had people outside the industry just following it. That's what Instagram does, and it's just weird to me, actually. But it's still going.
So now it visits all the vineyards and locations we go to, and our guests are I mean, it's really actually increased our following. Like,
It's
it's not exponential yet, but I mean, it's increasing faster than it definitely was. So it's given people a reason. And that's something with social media you have to find nowadays with any of your marketing that you do for any of your business. So, and you have to be diligent in posting, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, or if you're going to do Twitters or whatever. So we really stick to just Instagram and Facebook for our stuff and keep it simple.
So there's this guy that he's a Instagrammer, but he's called the West Coast Wine Guy, and he follows me. I actually followed him, and I met him the other day, and he's never had his face in Instagram. So he looked at my ugly green cup and he thought this was really cool, because it's kind of like what he does, but the ugly green, you don't see my face in it either. So it's kind of like, this is a really good idea. And instead of just holding up my ugly green cup might just be winding up next to the wine bottle and talking about the location we're at, as opposed to me saying something about it.
It's your avatar.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
totally.
Yeah.
I was hoping maybe in my life my avatar wouldn't be.
Well, the ugly green
It's
cup is going to
green
go on a
cup,
vacation, so it's going to fall. We will definitely keep it going while we're on
It's been to Crater
vacation.
Lake.
It's going to Bahamas and to
Right.
Florida.
Going international.
Right. We'll see what happens.
It'll get to go to Germany and Burgundy next June. We're going to get to go on a trip. Our niece is getting married.
Baden-Baden.
Yeah, in June, at the end of June. So we're going to definitely make our first trip to Bone
It's exciting.
this next
Yeah.
spring and do a little wine research while we're there. So that'll be even more fun and more for us to like give our informational arsenal in our heads to people. And hopefully we can
If anybody's interested in
make some
Ugly
connections.
Green Cup, it's hashtag Ugly Green Cup. You got it.
Well, thank you both so much for
Yes.
joining
It
us
was a
today,
pleasure.
for
It was fun.
telling your
Yes,
story,
absolutely.
answering our very few questions here. And we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
All right.